And we are live here to chat about the TV that we watched this week. And I need to start off with a formal apology, like a YouTuber style apology. Let me get a fake tissue. Guys, I never meant for this to happen, and I don't want to let you on. We're talking about a lot of male-led shows this week. I know, and I was not held hostage and forced at gunpoint to watch these. The problem is me. Like, I'm a contributor to the patriarchy this week, and all I can do is promise you that at least I will talk shit about said men. Kate, do you promise the same thing, or are you more of a middle ground on this situation?
I have to say, because I watch quality and I like myself, I don't have too much to shit on.
That's
but all
good.
of them were male-led, so.
That's very healthy. That sounds really well adjusted. And I won't be joining you on that position, but I'm glad that that position is represented. So we're going to be talking about Loki. We won't be going into too many spoilers, and I'll tell you why. It's not because I'm anti-spoiler. I'm very pro-spoiler. It's just that I've only seen the first episode. So there'll be some spoilers for the first episode. Anything beyond that, probably won't really be touching on. Like, I've seen some spoilers for the second episode, but we're just gonna be talking about Loki more as a whole rather than like specific plot points. Do with that as you will. Then we're going to be talking about Lucifer, because I just marathoned the latest installment of Lucifer, which was actually the latter half of season 5, so season 5B, and apparently season 6 is a go, and there's some cool potential spoilers for it, or teasers for it, whatever you want to call it. So we'll get into that, and then we'll do our touch base on, how our old faithful shows are doing. So, well, Flash isn't faithful. So really Superman and Lois more than anything else. We'll just kind of touch on those and other things we watched this week. But first, what I have come to find as the most exciting part of these chats, updates for the week. There were a lot of updates this week, Kate, in terms of cancellations. Talk us through our news for the week.
Okay, so I don't have any listing of cancellation. I guess I just completely missed that.
I got you.
Go ahead and talk about that. Okay, so the two things I rang as news was Netflix's Persuasion. So that one is the Dakota Johnson-led one, released some behind-the-scenes photos. So we were misled with the initial announcement of this movie. Initially, it was supposed to be a modern adaptation. They didn't clarify this enough, so everybody assumed it was going to be a modern retelling. It is actually apparently going to be a modern flavor, kind of like Emma was, where it's going to inject a lot of humor or something like that. Basically, it's just going to be like that. Which, whenever you say modern flair with Jane Austen, I'm like, oh, you're going to add sex to it. Thanks, but no thanks. But we'll give it the benefit of the doubt until we get there, because it is definitely not a full modern adaptation. It is supposed to be set, from what I can tell, in the time setting. However, after watching all the research I have done on like Regency dress, there's going to be people in the costuming community that are very appalled.
I just like the idea that there's like a Regency era costuming community that will increase their bond with each other over how angry this show will make them. Like, I'm not shocked that this community exists. Like, I'm aware. I understand how this works. It's just like, it will bring some people joy in that friendships will be formed over it.
Yes. And it's one of those things, I am personally not inside this community, but I am a gleeful bystander. I like to watch the conversations take part, because I don't know enough to really contribute. It's just fun to watch people dismantle things that I was like, this should be fine, and then it's really not, apparently. But so that one when that comes out, I'm excited for that. It'll be on Netflix. And then on June 25th, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but on June 25th, which is next Friday, the first episode of the Benedict Society will be airing. Yay!
I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. That's gonna be fun. That one's gonna be on Disney Plus.
Oh, nice. Okay, so that will be released on a Friday.
Yes.
Okay. The following week, we will be discussing that.
Yes.
I'm excited. With Loki's release schedule, it kind of poses some difficulties in that unless I watch it like during the day or really early evening on Wednesday, I'm not really watching it right before we go live. But maybe that's for the best because then I won't really spoil anything. We can kind of talk about the week before. Maybe that's for the best.
Yeah.
So, in terms of cancellation news, I think it was mostly NBC and I want to say CBS or something that released new cancellations for within this last week. And the ones that I saw for NBC, I think the Zoe's Playlist cancellation came right before last week's live stream. It would have been like that day. But they also canceled Manifest, which was one that I actually was watching and I wasn't completely current on, but was mostly current on. It's funny because I'm sad that it got canceled because it was moderately interesting to me. But this show, every single ship I liked, they deviated away from with remarkable accuracy. Like early in season 1, I kind of there was this estranged husband and wife, and she had found, they had been apart for 5 years, and she had like a new partner, and shortly after was pregnant and thought the kid might be his, whatever. And the husband kind of bonded with a woman from the plane that went down, and I was rooting for their current romances because she basically had like a whole new husband, thinking her husband was dead, and they had great chemistry and he was really cute, whatever. And then the husband, this lab tech, they made really good partners, and it was kind of almost this buddy cop dynamic, and I'm a sucker for a slow burn, that kind of shit, right? Like Your Bones or Castle or whatever type of thing. They took a whole different direction on that and every other ship I liked. So when I was reading the comments on the cancellation, a lot of people were like, oh, this was only good in season 1. It hasn't been good since then. So it was kind of validating, but at the same time, it was still interesting to me without the ships that I was rooting for. So sad about it. Ish. I know for both that and Zoe. Tell me, I want to know your thoughts on this, and this is a safe space. You can be honest. For both Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, literally the second it was canceled, and also Manifest, and I'm going to go ahead and say for literally every single show that's been canceled in the last year, no exceptions, immediately the powers that be are trying to get fans to rally to get it picked up on another streaming service. So what are your thoughts on these rally for canceled show campaigns? I probably won't judge you, but also sometimes I lie.
It's very much like pick your battles. So ones that have a very large cult following, that it just is not getting the views that they want on the current platform, but still makes a good amount of money. And if they could just lower the budget, they could still be making a lot of money, such as Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Those shows to me make sense. I'm sure that's what happened with Lucifer. They got moved over to Netflix. They were able to kind of adjust the production of the show and keep it within the same quality. That way, people that already had a cult following continue to watch. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think shows like Zoe's Playlist and Manifest have the same power. because I never see people talk about it on Twitter unless something really heartbreaking happens on one of those shows. Never saw anything about Manifest except like the year it came out. And with Zoe's Playlist, there were those heartbreaking episodes where it really crushed people, and they would talk about like that one scene, and that was it. And that's also a show that you have to like musicals, and so I very quickly dropped off watching it. I know there's a lot of other people that never could get into it, and I don't think there's a remarkability with it, whereas like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, by the time that got canceled, it had already kind of established itself as this thing that the network it was currently on just didn't want to continue to do. But another network was fully willing to try. I can't think of any other shows right off the top of my head, but I think shows that are dying because the quality is dying out or they don't have direction. Shows like The Flash. I'm not saying that that's going anywhere. I'm just saying like things that have
I'm saying it's going somewhere.
Okay. So shows that have reached or gone far past their prime don't need to be repicked up. But shows that, especially like procedural shows that can continue on and you don't necessarily have to have this big arc, it's kind of meant to be this repetitive thing, you can get away with it. If it has a clear trajectory and it's still high quality, but production is not working out, you can get away with it. But things like Zoe's Playlist and Manifest don't seem to have those same criteria, and I don't know how successful that would be to switch over.
I think that's a really succinct way to put it. For me, I will say, first of all campaigns to save a show across the board, I think are annoying and embarrassing at a minimum. However,
fair.
It's not to say I wouldn't participate in one. It's just that I would be annoyed and embarrassed to do so. But I do a lot of annoying and embarrassing things regardless. So like, that's not enough. That's not enough to stop me. Here's what I want to see in any show that's actually trying to do a save whatever campaign. I want to know how being on a different network would change them. So you gave the example of Lucifer. I think that's a great example. I could have gone either way with it getting canceled or saved. I really enjoy the show. I'm pleased to continue watching episodes, but had they been canceled, I'd have been like, okay, they're, like it is what it is. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, same way, funny show. It moved to NBC. Cool, great, funny show, but like it wasn't anything to write home about. However, with both of those instances, with Lucifer moving to Netflix, as I think you've mentioned in previous weeks, or one of us has, moving to Netflix means it got to be just a little raunchier, or they could do some drug references, or a tiny bit more violent, and they never went crazy gratuitous with it. But with a show like Lucifer, it almost stands out if you don't have a little bit of like, shocking raunchiness. Like it almost seems too.
If you're telling a story, it feels like implicitly like it should be really violent. So there should be moments of extreme vulgarity, and the network that hosts it can't do that. There's moments where it feels cheesy or canned.
Yeah, it seems like kind of fake, or like the Kids Bop edited version of it. So by moving to Netflix, they had the option to change that. Sometimes by moving to Netflix or something like that, they can shorten a show, have like fewer longer episodes or an atypical format. With the NBC transition for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I don't really feel like the content of the show changed that much, but it was more so that it was marketed with shows in a similar family and from a similar creator. So if there is a substantial way you could say it would be somewhat different, then I'm okay with it. But, okay, I'm going to sound like some kind of, I don't know, what's the generation that's even like older than boomers? Like a true crotchety old man. Whatever that one is. I'm going to sound like that right now, but just like bear with me. Sometimes you have to be okay with failing. Not everybody gets a trophy. Not everybody gets 6 seasons. And sometimes if you're not good enough, you don't get your 4th season or whatever it is. I think both of these were canceled after 2 or 3 seasons. Like first of all, there are a lot of pilots that get made that don't get a full series order. A lot. There's a lot of scripts that get written that don't get a pilot made. There's a lot of first seasons that get filmed and don't even air. Like, if you've even made it to the point of TV, if you've made it to the point where you get your content in front of potential fans' eyes, that is a huge privilege. And if you fail after making it that far, you kind of deserve to fail. And nothing good that is succeeding gets canceled. And I know that's an unpopular opinion, and people say, oh, it got canceled because it didn't have the whatever, it didn't appeal to whatever demo, or it didn't have a message that the show stood behind, or it didn't have this, that, or the other. That's all bullshit. If people are watching it, it's going to stay on, even if it has the best or worst message or whatever, or goes for or against this, that, or the other NBC's execs, personal morals or ethics. Money comes first for them. They will keep it on if it's getting watched. So, like, if it's not getting watched, what gives these people the audacity to say our very next step is to demand a new audience? I first want to hear a new pitch, either a new pitch of the same show saying, oh, we want to do a raunchier version or a darker version or a lighter version or a cleaner version or a comedic version, or whatever it is. I want to hear how you're changing it. And then fans, if they can choose to advocate for it to be on a certain platform. But I don't know why people feel like they can pitch a failed product. I know why it is. It's because they're men. They feel like they can pitch a failed product and expect everybody to rally around behind them without promising to change anything. That's so annoying to me.
I, for the most part, agree. I do know there are some times where there are shows that are actually quite popular that do get canceled because they don't see it going anywhere, or there's actually really big issues behind the scenes of production that they just cannot work together anymore, which is upsetting. And those are definitely circumstances where we might be able to consider a movement. But my issue more is very few shows have the material, the stuff to say, and the quality of writing behind it to last more than 4 seasons.
Yeah.
You start going that long, there are definitely certain genres of TV show that can sustain that. Procedural shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like Grey's Anatomy, because you're kind of just following the daily lives of these characters, and their arcs are not massive arcs. They're very much like episode to episode going through life. You can get away with, as long as you maintain a certain quality of writing, getting away with going for a very long time. With shows like Arrow wasn't going to make it much past season 8. They might have made it to season 10 if it weren't that for the fact that they joined the Arrowverse.
Mm-hmm.
And that brought it down, but that's a full other conversation. I would make the argument that while like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had lost a lot of popularity, they also very much knew when to play, like, just put their cards down. Mm-hmm. Because as much as I would have loved to see more, all these characters have kind of reached a certain like point in their arc where you could tie it up pretty neatly and kind of leave the storyline hanging enough for you to understand where they would go. So like Daisy off in space and Fitzsimmons and whatever. But they didn't overplay their hand to a point of spoiling the show. And I think that's my biggest problem with moving shows over, is sometimes, yeah, you didn't get to tell your full story, you didn't get to continue on, you didn't get to do it as long as you wanted to, but you also haven't had the chance to ruin it yet.
Right.
So you get to keep it the same, you get to at least have the pleasure of leaving with a decent body of work instead of the eventual garbage fire that you watch right now, which is the
Right.
fact, and
Right.
the occasional garbage fire that was Arrow because of its involvement in Arrowverse, and so on and so on. Or like the one that gets me the worst is Once Upon a Time. Loved that show in the beginning, was unbearable at the end. I think when they go too long and they don't have enough planned out, it's good that it kind of gets canceled, and we just need to take it. And if people loved it so much, they should write things that are similar to, but new and fresh, and start over instead of just going, we want the same thing, but it's slowly to get worse and then ruin the taste of the show forever.
Right. Viewers are always going to go down. Budget is always going to go down. So you have to come into this, I think, if you want like Manifest said, they had 6 seasons of a story. They wanted to go for 6 seasons. Okay, well, if you wanted to go for 6 seasons, you had to really quickly make adaptations when you saw your viewership going down. And if you were being attentive to audience reactions, you were being attentive to your story, you were doing due justice to pacing and not just trying to do some cheap little gotcha, I'm saving story for later type of thing, and it still couldn't sell for longer than 3 seasons, then you didn't have a 6-season concept and it didn't deserve. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wanted it to be, but we all have to like come to the same place, be on the same page, that sometimes what you intend for the story to be is not necessarily what it deserves. And I see the word deserve thrown around. Oh, the fans deserve 6 seasons. The story deserves to be told what it doesn't. It doesn't. There is simply no like big D deserve that can be attached to storytelling like this. And I feel like you have to be able to acknowledge that in order to distance yourself enough from your writing to adapt. And it's the people who can't acknowledge that and won't adapt who aren't going to make it to 6 seasons. And maybe that's okay. You had a 3-season story and you'll go out without dignity because you didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, anyways, that was my struggle this week with cancellations. I was harping on cancellations in Kate's DMs as well. Carrie in the chat says, good evening, ladies. I haven't watched any Loki yet, so I'll cover my ears a bit. Also, if Soups and Low comes up, I'll cover the ears again. Well, those are 2 of the things we'll be discussing. However, for Loki, I personally won't be going over any spoilers from episode 2 because I haven't watched it yet. But having watched episode 1, I did come prepared with some questions and thoughts, and I would love to hear both of your thoughts on that. Should we start with Loki? What do you think?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Okay, so Loki. My Little Rabbit says, being attentive to audience attention. Yes, exactly this. Pay attention, adapt, etc. Such a good point. Yeah, like, Kate, I'm going to go back and then I'm going to come back to Loki, but like one final tiny
because I still have something I could say too.
Okay, awesome. I probably cut you off, but I saw Loki mentioned in the chat and went rambling down that. Okay. I remember there was this musical I think I was watching. I think it was like a Greek tragedy musical, and I don't remember what it was. Greek tragedy comedy themed musical. And there was this woman, she would have been like one of the older actresses, I want to say. She probably was like 40s to 50s, but I was kind of young when I was watching this, so she probably looked older to me, but she was like the villainous old woman to me. She played this villain, but it was a funny villain. And she walks out on stage in like the latter third of this production. And at this point, the audience was like eating out of her hand, and she knew it. And she walked out at this point of like situational dramatic irony, and the crowd immediately was like, and kind of like laughing before she had even done a thing. And with so much poise, I'm sure it's elevated on a pedestal in my memory, but it's just like this moment I think of when I think of being like attentive to an audience. With so much poise, she just turns and looks at the audience and is like, shh, and then proceeds. And we all just like lost it. But that is what I'm talking about. Like when you have the gift of a live audience, which TV has a live audience, we are now that kind of medium, you must use it to elevate your show. And every show that I've seen get canceled, quote unquote, before its time in the last year or whatever, with the exception of some that were just not good stories, and I don't know how it made it this far, but it did because somebody's cousin's uncle, whatever, made it happen. But the vast majority did not listen to their audience and just barreled straight ahead, and they had a good start because anything that goes to TV, at least for the first 3 episodes, has got heavily revised. Like they had to pitch and pitch and pitch this pilot and take back notes and revise and pitch and get rejected. And they got so much reaction on the pilot and nothing for episodes 4 and beyond that they just barrel through the first 3 that are usually pretty good, and they have no concept of responding to a live audience after that, or simply just do not do so. And that is what's so critical. Okay, back to Kate.
Well, and I was just going to add, especially with this really big increase in streaming services, there's also been an increase in limited series. Now, limited series have been around, but especially now there's a lot of limited series, and there's both limited series of weekly release and full release. And those also kind of get a lot of the advantages of both movie and TV, and a lot of the risk and reward. So you get the risk of not being able to get audience feedback and course correct. You also get full control. You get like a package that you would get like with a movie. You get to make sure that you have all your actors the entire time, whereas with shows, people leave. And a lot of times that's what causes issues with shows. And I think this is actually starting to influence how we watch normal television, because there's this expectation that seasons of television can kind of recreate this limited series atmosphere. Not to be a broken record, with WandaVision benefited from the structure of television because of the type of story it was telling. Also, the variety of length. There were so many reasons why it benefited so much of television, but in a lot of ways, it was more of a movie because there wasn't anything that was going to change in the writing process. They were putting it out, no response. It was a clean package. There was not a lot of production bumps. It wasn't switching directors like they do with television or anything like that. It was very much a package deal. And you can see the whole thought process of the writers, of the producers, of the directors. And you don't always get that with television, traditional television. And I think that's an interesting thing that's starting to influence how we view traditional television, and why even myself, as much as I love being in a fandom and being able to contribute for a longer time, have realized that the quality of writing and the quality of the actual product is much better normally in a limited series, because it has the benefit of being more in depth than a movie, which I don't normally like movies. I'm weird. But you still get that clean, crisp, full presentation that you won't get in long-form television.
By the way, I'm with you on not usually liking movies. I'm much more of a TV person than a movie person, and have only become more so. I know Lucifer was kind of the main thing I marathon this week. What you're saying there on kind of holding episodic release television to block release or marathon release television to the same standards, I definitely think that has come to benefit Lucifer, because if I think if I had to watch it week to week, the case of the weakness would really start to wear on me, and it would be one of those shows that I might watch on a weekly basis and stay current, but it's kind of in one year and out the other. Whereas with marathoning it, I can track the larger story and be able to keep in, like with the case of the weeks, which sometimes I pay attention to, sometimes I don't. I can at least see how they fit within the broader big story of like essentially in this show, Satan is becoming God, which is just really, that's cool. That's cute. I feel like I'm going to get struck by lightning even just saying that. It's fine. I'm really liking the latest installment, and I think they've made some smart choices with splitting up season 5A and season 5B. It was kind of a happy medium for Lucifer, and that they were able to still have the marathon effect, but also not just release the whole season at once, so they could have two shorter but overarching stories. And apparently it's working because they're going to get a season 6, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited, or I hope that people in production and stuff like that start to clue in that there are storytelling potential not only in the actual traditional production, but how they decide to release it. Because, as we previously discussed, there are certain shows that definitely benefit from one or the other, and they actually sell it better the way they choose. Mm-hmm. And I think if they're more conscientious about that, especially in more traditional television settings, they might be able to sustain TV shows longer and profit better off of the shows that they are making. Mm-hmm. We've previously discussed like the 22 episode package for a lot of traditional television. It's a lot for them to manage. It's a lot of time for them to get a single story or two storylines, major storylines to get through. Mm-hmm. And they miss and they drop a whole lot of storyline. Whereas like the 10 or the 15 or the 13 episode order, they have a much better handle on what they've actually got. Mm-hmm. So I wonder with all the streaming services, because even though we've had them for a little while, they're still relatively new and we're still adapting and they're still creating more and more, how much it affects how we release and watch and consume on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm. My little rabbit in the chat says, also, how much I envy fans who get to watch shows once they have the whole story. Quick example she gives is Suits. Yeah, I think I saw somebody was marathoning Arrow on my timeline, and I can't imagine how different that is to marathon it now, knowing, that there's certain ships that are endgame, there's certain characters who die and certain characters who live, certain teams that form, certain parents who die, if you kind of know what's going to happen, at least in a general sense, you can still be surprised, but it sets up a framework for a broader show that you're choosing to watch, rather than if you're choosing to watch Arrow season 1, episode 1, when that is all that's aired thus far, which is a very odd decision to make, and I'm not sure why I made that decision back in 2012, but
yeah, I mean, I actually caught up when season 6 was airing, so I watched all of the first 5 seasons and then started watching.
That's a healthier choice. That's a better point to jump in.
I mean, controversial opinion, 6 and 7 were some of my favorite seasons, so
I think they were as well. I think that the show got better in some ways towards the end, and a lot of the critiques of it being better in the early seasons are people's bad memory, nostalgia, and simply a difference in the way fans were consuming television at that point, which makes me sound so old, but even what we now know of as like typical like fan celebrity interactions at cons, which I know haven't occurred since COVID, or fan celebrity interactions on like Q&As, when you'd have you have an actor or an actress who will take over the show's Instagram and you can ask them questions and they post pictures, all of that. A lot of that change occurred between 2014 to 2016. And anything prior to that, it was just a starkly different format. It was the very cutting edge of that kind of interaction. And a lot of the interaction, even just from major network shows or movie or anything that was on the front end of that, was fan-led. Pretty Little Liars was it is not cutting edge television, but it was cutting edge social media interaction. They were amongst the first to really like go ham and hard on having cast social media interactions be front and center and kind of sell a story and drum up a story in a very overt and tangible way. And from there, CW kind of started to pick up some of those techniques, but they weren't mainstreamized, I guess. Things like fan chats before or after the show, they started making that a CW thing that they would try to do either live on their socials or live. They even had some that would like air live between commercials leading up to shows in, again, 2014 to 2016, but they were so scattered and all over the place. You'd have one thing announced and it would go on for like 3 weeks, and then they would switch to something. Like, it was really just the wild, wild west. But we don't need to get into that. I think we're about to get into kind of another wild, wild west situation with the breaking even of stream releases versus network television releases, and block marathons versus like block releases and individual episode releases. So that transitions us to Loki. And I have some questions regarding Mr. God of Mischief. Now, I am not your Marvel expert, okay? I know a thing or two, but I'm not your Marvel expert. I did, however, go into this, and I don't know if I was just like getting Loki's lore mixed up with like fan theories and fan reactions and whatever, but like I've seen him in movies, but I always got the vibe online that he was supposed to be this very like kind of, I don't want to say like womanizing, but like this very flirtatious god, this very almost like a Lucifer-esque type of character. And I didn't necessarily get that vibe from him. He didn't even come across as particularly mischievous, if you will, in this first episode. So my question for you, for Carrie, for anybody else who's been watching Loki, what vibe am I supposed to be getting from Loki?
I've watched the first 2 episodes. The vibe pretty much hasn't really shifted, so I'm not going to spoil anything on this answer. Loki has always, like, I was never in the, oh my god, I love Loki group. Even before I watched the movies, I knew who Loki was. I had a pretty good understanding of his character and personality, of him thinking he was smarter than everybody else, and him sometimes actually being ahead of everybody, but a lot of times, because he talks so much, getting figured out pretty quickly. In other movies, and especially like the tone that's still present in Captain America and Avengers movies, and the first 2 Thor movies, they're somewhat serious with moments of comedy, but they're not playing with a really funny, unique deadpan, and it's not a really special or unique tone. They're telling a superhero story, and they're just focused on telling the plot and the characters and not doing anything funny with the tone. I don't think necessarily they've changed his personality in this show. I think what they've done is they've put him in such a strange place with people that are so unaffected by him that it makes his charm and almost smarminess, but that's not the right word I'm going for. His charisma almost, it's almost
his like oil
funny
salesman nature, maybe.
Yes. How just confident he is in himself. You can still tell he knows, like, he's a smart guy, but you put a smart guy from the ancient Rome in modern culture, and their minds are going to be blown, and they're going to be struggling to keep up. They're still going to pick up on consistent human cues, be able to eventually figure it out, still manipulate people as he's doing, but for the most part, his intelligence is actually going to make him look like a butt of a joke for a little bit. And I think that's actually something really funny, because it is definitely, I mean, at the very end of the first episode, they do kind of rip apart a big portion of his character is him hurting other people because he's scared and doesn't know how to like control his world around him. He's afraid of not having control. So how he does that is hurts other people.
This is a bad example, but you're basically saying he's like, it's like a Sheldon effect. And I know that's a bad metaphor, but.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I kinda like.
Okay.
Because whereas that is played, like that's a traditional comedy, this is very much like it's a sci-fi action show, but it's almost like you put a smart guy in real world in there and they're going to act like they know what's going on, but they really have no idea what's going on. And that's funny, but what it also does is it really tears really quickly and easily and uniquely tears away that layer of self-confidence for you to be able to see what's really going on, like what really is his problem. And because these miniseries are really going into like the character traits and like really ripping apart characters, I easily understand why they've chosen to do this, and I think it's fascinating, especially once you watch episode 2. You watch the things that he has to confront in episode 2. It's less direct than episode 1, but it's still very much a dismantling of who he is and a reassessment of why he does what he does. All through the guise of making him seem like a bumbling idiot around 60s technology that's doing futuristic science.
That makes sense. I think maybe I get the impression from the first episode that they were intentionally trying to make him seem not flawed, but maybe weak, or having like a lot of critical weaknesses, a lot of gaps in his knowledge and skills and interpersonal relationship, whatever. They establish some emotional weaknesses with him viewing the death of his mother in that hybrid situation. They establish some interpersonal weaknesses with his inability to read certain situations and how he reacted when his powers were and were not gone, and it took very little to frustrate him, etc., etc. He didn't know when to be scared as opposed to be frustrated. There's just a lot of weaknesses they established for him, and I just did not expect that many weaknesses right off the bat. I expected his strengths to be highlighted more, and sometimes with whether it be villains or heroes or whatever, highlighting their strengths is not just highlighting their powers. And they didn't highlight his powers very much either, but for a charming villain, you'll see them go all James Bondy. For a smart villain, you'll see them do some really cool calculation stuff, whatever. And with him being the god of mischief, I just expected some really advanced, interesting mischief, not just him using a rewind thing to have somebody step forward and backwards for his own amusement. But maybe I don't know. Maybe I lack background of his character and typical patterns.
So part of it, I think a lot of it has to do with, in most, not all, but most of the movies he's been in previously have, like I said, been in the traditional tone of a superhero movie. Mm-hmm. Nothing like noteworthy about the tone. Because of that, there's that stereotype of the villain never shuts up. He just talks and talks and talks. And while that's always true about Loki, and they have mentioned it before, it's kind of overlooked sometimes because that's a very commonplace thing that you almost don't notice it anymore. With the tone shift, it feels like he never stops talking. It feels like he's talking so much to like compensate for something. Now, in episode 2, it will start to address some of his strengths. It's not all just completely dumping on him, but it starts to address it in a more, you basically rip apart the mystique of him being a god and like being the god of mischief, and you start to actually see his flaws as a human, and like you see him more as a grounded individual rather than just Loki, guy who stabs people in the back. It is also funny because I don't remember where, so don't quote me on this, but I think I remember hearing something about how, yeah, that Loki, both in Marvel and in Norse mythology, is supposed to be the god of mischief, but the amount of times that tricks are played on him and he does not see them coming is exorbitant. Like the amount of times he himself is tricked. So it's almost like, to me, he's kind of like that kid snickering in the corner that like will put something sticky in a chair and just wants to watch somebody get embarrassed and laugh, but then is also the kid that gets pushed into the locker. Like he's not as cool or as clever as he thinks he is. And that is a massive portion of his character, is he thinks he's so clever and he thinks he's the best trick of all time, and he's really not.
That makes sense, especially with him being Thor's brother. Because no matter how cool or tricky he may be, he's not Thor, you know? And I imagine that's been a
Yeah.
point, which I know has, I think, come up in previous movies. I've seen, I think, one of the 3 Thor movies, maybe. So I'm probably missing a lot of that character development as well, but I am curious to see where it goes. I watched it with my husband and he loved it. He liked it better than Falcon and Winter Soldier's opening pilot. Like we only have the 1 episode to compare it to. And he liked it equal to WandaVision. I did not like it equal to WandaVision, but I did like it. So we'll see where it goes. I will say somebody was asking me on Twitter, like, oh, should I watch this show? Is it good? Because I'd mentioned that I watched Loki. And I was like, it's about a lot of men throwing like tantrums. And that's not normally something I would recommend. And there's no romance, and that's also something I wouldn't normally recommend. Like it's cute, it's quirky, it's fun in its own way, but all of the individual elements are not what I normally would be interested in at all.
Yeah. I mean, it has aspects that I would normally gravitate to, but it is a very male cast, which is something that I don't outright reject, but I don't typically end up like being obsessed with those characters. However, I think yet again the tone, there's something about it that naturally just kind of takes the piss out of the characters
Yeah.
themselves. I mean, like, you haven't seen it yet, and he's definitely, it's not to the same extent, but there are moments where they even kind of make fun of Mobius. It's very, I think, very much like they took, I mean, it's not like they took cues because it was filmed at the same time, but there's a lot of similarities with mixing really, really deep psychological topics and deconstruction with humor. Now, this is more like physical tonality humor, whereas WandaVision was very much like a sitcom humor. But it's this idea that you can kind of present these characters, and through the jokes and through the uniqueness of the tone and the presentation of how we're getting the story compared to other superhero stories, you get to know more about the characters simply because of the difference that you get from a normal superhero thing.
In the chat, My Little Rabbit says that was her that asked me on Twitter. So My Little Rabbit is Steph. Steph, that was you. Okay. That That makes sense now. I saw the username My Little Rabbit and I was like, it kind of sounds familiar, but I did not know that was the Phantomette herself, Steph. She also says she's going to watch Loki episode 1 this weekend. I want to hear your thoughts on it. Am I being unfair by couching it as a bunch of men throwing fits? I don't feel like I'm being unfair. However, unfortunately, many of the shows that I watch are a bunch of men throwing fits and me falling in love with the 2 to 3 female characters present for the entire duration of the show. It's also known as Suits.
Can I say one thing? It's not really a spoiler, but it is kind of a spoiler that I know you're going to be excited about.
Sure.
There is a villainess that is revealed, and you are going to be very happy with it.
I'm excited. I will watch episode 2 ASAP now.
Yeah.
See, if this is Loki, but really about a bunch of villainesses, I'm fine. I'll watch for that, 100%. I already have my tickets to see Black Widow when it comes out, by the way, for those curious.
You know,
the narrator, no one was curious. What?
Until they postpone it yet again.
Kate, no, I refuse. I'm not even speaking that into existence. It was hard to get tickets too. I got them like pretty soon after it was because I wanted them at like this one specific theater and it had to be on a Saturday, whatever. But they're pretty hard to get tickets, which is promising. It means other people are seeing it. But back off, my favorite theater here in the city. Okay. I now transition to what else we watched this week, aka our wrap up, because it's 8:55. So, Kate, what else did you watch / read this week?
So I watched. I was babysitting. The baby was an infant, but I'm going to use it as an excuse. I watched The Mitchells and versus the Machines, which was a kids animated Netflix movie. It was surprisingly really good. I watched a little bit of The Good Doctor. I have now watched him start to date the lab tech. Just forgot her name.
Carly, I want to say her name was.
Carly.
I did not like that relationship.
She's not a bad person. Just didn't like the relationship. Superman and Lois. I watched the most recent episode earlier today. I'm loving that show still. I don't know what they're gonna do with the remaining 5 episodes, but we'll see. And that's it. That's all I watched this week.
Solid choices, 10 out of 10. So here's where we overlap. I likewise watched the latest episode of Superman and Lois. Loved it. I've been continuously impressed with their handling of Lana because I feel like she's a character they could so easily throw under the bus and have her either be the bad mom or the dumb woman or the corrupted woman or whatever. I really like that they're showing her husband become corrupted instead of her and then like consequences of that and actually handling that in a reasonable way. So that's been cool. Steph / My Little Rabbit in the chat says, Carly, no. See, I didn't mind Carly, but I thought she and Sean were a terrible, terrible match.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah. I'm Sean and Leia all the way. I've been so pleased with the romance on that show. They really don't hold back when it comes to like tropes. It's so good. You're in for some treats.
So I will point out though, when you were talking about Lana on Suits, so you've watched the most recent episode, correct?
Yeah.
When they have her take on the mother's consciousness, the entire time, I don't know if it's like the audio flare that they put on it or whatever, but I was hella suspicious of her the entire time. I was like, is she going to backstab? Is she going to backstab? Is she going to backstab?
Because she sounded like a robot.
Yeah, and like it was all cold demeanor, and I was like I get it. They're aliens and they're like different culture and everything, but it's also like a human body. And
Mm-hmm.
this feels very cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like it's an adult man who never really knew his mother, but it's still like, I have just, and you're asking Lois a really specific questions. Like, why are you being so creepy about it? That was
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a complaint or if they're later going to do something with that, or if it was just an acting choice. I don't know. But I was wigged out with that character.
I'm right there with you. I think anytime they have, because obviously they're doing a similar doing slash did a similar thing on the Flash with having his mother inhabit another body, or like having somebody else inhabit his mother's body, just like any another entity takes on the image of your mother or vice versa. It's just like, do y'all need therapy? Like, I think if maybe budgets are cut, but maybe you can like share a therapist across shows for these writers. How can we help you get past the mommy issues?
So like there's this thing called like the Oedipus complex. You guys need to have some talks. Do
Right.
you feel like killing your own father? Like is that I just want to know.
And the thing is, like, if you really wanted to like go ham and like explore, you know, mother issues on like a therapy level, there's like shows to do that. And I feel like this isn't it, but what do I know? I'm still watching. Love it. Interesting. Handled way better than the way the Flash is handling their like incestuous situation. But I'm with you in finding that a little creepy. It's just with Superman and Lois, I felt like it was intentionally creepy, which was nice. And other than marathoning, of course, Lucifer, I watched the second episode of The Bachelorette, which is going very well in that none of my top four have got eliminated yet. All of the like drama and connections and all of that at this point are very I mean, they're always fake. Everything's fake 100% of the time, but they're very new. And so there's no like one specific romance that we're supposed to be rooting for yet. Like there's front runners, but there's nobody that we know well enough as the audience to like root for. But it's going well. I'm there. Steph says therapist, mommy issues. Paula Agard is available. You know what? Anytime I'm trashing a show, and talking about therapists, please understand there's always a worse way mommy issues can be handled and a worse way therapy can be handled. And that is how Suits handled it, with their lead ending up dating his therapist. In like the least sexy way possible. Not that I ever want a ship that's not my ship that I'm rooting for to be like sexy and engaging and appealing, but like it also wasn't. Anyways, we're at 9:01. Bishop is here. Bishop. Hi. Bishop wants to say hi again. You say hi, Bishop?
He's screaming, put me
Say
down.
hi. Hi. He said no. He does not say hi.
No.
All right. Well, everybody have a wonderful week. And I'm going to go watch Loki season 1, episode 2. Bye.
Ah.